Me too.
Yeah.
Talk to me. Talk to me. None of the things you say.
Talk to me. Talk to me. In your own special way. Welcome, New Mexico and those around the country listening in to this broadcast. You're listening to Dialogue. I'm your host, MK, and I have got a fantastic, wonderful voice to bring to our show today. And I'm sure you know her. So I kind of like to put a little suspense out there, but I'm just going to tell you who it is right off the top. It's Sally Kohn. She is one of the leading progressive voices in America. She's currently a columnist and CNN political commentator, previously a Fox News contributor. She's been a frequent guest on MSNBC and writes for media outlets, including The Washington Post, The New York Times, New York Magazine, Cosmopolitan, The Daily Beast, to name a few. And she lives in Brooklyn with her partner and their daughter, Willa. And I want to add this to her credentials from my perspective. And I just want to say a quick hello, though. Welcome and hello, Sally Kohn.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very, very happy to have you here with us.
What a lovely introduction. You could just repeat that for an hour. That sounds good to me.
Okay, well, this is what I wrote, and I wrote this about you. Okay, I'd like to add this to your list of credentials. I would like to add her latest book, The Opposite of Hate, which is what we're here to talk about. It's what I believe now puts her at the top of the list in regard to all commentators and or political voices from both sides, not just in our world nationally, but globally, because she is courageously and very honestly tackling the issue of hate. In what are very divisive times, she looks at the different ways it expresses itself in not just our own personal perspectives, but our larger cultural language, and unveils the many ways it is sewn into the very fabric of our identities. She examines the role it plays and ultimately how we speak to each other as people and as a public. Sally challenges us to begin looking at the hate that lies within, first and foremost. And she does this via courageously telling her own story about her journey through hate and her relationship with it. Let's talk about that journey, Sally, and why it inspired you to write this book.
Oh, thank you. Well, that was lovely. I'm gonna get that whole thing tattooed on my back if I can get your permission. That was
Sounds
lovely.
Great.
Thank you.
Sounds great.
Look, I don't think it's a surprise to any of your listeners that we have a problem with hate in our world and in our country today. We could go back and forth about whether it's the worst it's ever been. I actually happen to think it's not. We, especially as a country, the United States has a pretty long and dark history of hate. We're a nation that in many ways was founded on and through hate. And at the same time, we're having a real battle with it today. And, it doesn't have to be the worst it's ever been to be bad enough for us to do something about it. What's interesting to me, many things that when diving into this phenomenon that struck me, is that it's one of the only problems that pretty much everybody agrees is a problem, and pretty much no one thinks is their problem. That we all think somebody else is doing it. Everybody thinks someone else is doing it, whatever side of whatever group or identity you're on. And so part of my goal was to get all of us, myself included, to take responsibility for our piece of the problem, our part of hate, and how we can be part of the solution.
Yeah, and that's a very revolutionary thing to say at this moment in time, because clearly people are really, really amped up, and in particular on the left side about Trump, and then it goes without saying, the hate is. It seems to be growing on both sides. And in fact, can you talk a little bit about how your experience going into Fox News, acting as the progressive voice there, and then sort of how that got you in touch with some of your own hate and the beginning of that journey, and then
Sure.
when Trump came along, it sort of shifted for you again. Can you just begin that story for us a bit?
completely. I spent the first 15 years of my career as a community organizer, traveling around the country to help people who are trying to make a difference and make change in their communities and towns and states and workplaces and schools, help them do what they wanted to do and connect them to more resources and tools and skills. And I basically fell into the world of media, and in particular, after some unusual twists and turns, I guess, ended up at Fox News, ended up being a on-air commentator at Fox News. And when I went to Fox, after talking to all my friends, literally, who were the organizers and activists trying to, shut Fox down, after getting their, input and blessing, I honestly thought, all right, these are people the people on air, off air, the viewers even, these are people who support things I find very hateful, and I figured they would be 100% hateful people. So not just their views and opinions, but, just hateful people in every way, including hating me. And so what happened when I went to Fox was really two things. One, I realized that wasn't the case. I realized that they were people. They were complicated, kind, mean, cruel, funny, caring, hurting, complicated people, just like me, not completely hate. And then the second thing that happened is I realized I hated them, that I was the one who had a lot of preconceived notions and stereotypes and ideas about what they believed and who they were, and had made all these had these broad sweeping ideas that were pretty hateful. And that led me both to interrogate hate in myself, and also to want to understand the phenomenon of hate more broadly, how we do it, why we do it, and how we can stop.
Well, let's keep going with that. How, why, and all of the above, everything you just said.
Well, I mean, the good news, and I think this comes as a surprise to a lot of people, the good news is you can stop, right? That we are not designed nor destined to hate. And, a lot of people say, well, look, people come up to me at events or speeches and insist that we are in some way hardwired to hate. And that is partially true. It is true that because of evolutionary biology, we do have this tendency in all of our minds to divide the world into us and them, to in-groups and out-groups, and to have a preference for our in-groups. That's true. But who we put in the in-group and the out-group, the identities, the categories that we give weight and importance to, that's not wired into our biology or our DNA or anything. That is learned. That is soft wire, right? That is taught to us by society, by politics, by policies, by culture, and that means we can unlearn it. And that goes for intense partisanship. It goes for racism. It goes for misogyny. It goes for anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. Those are not inevitable. They are not inherently a part of who we are or our society, and they can change. And in my book, I talk to ex-neo-Nazis and ex-terrorists and people who did change. And if they can change, there's certainly hope for the rest of us.
Yeah, and I don't know how many of those stories you want to give away. Do you want to hint at any of the extreme cases of,
Sure. I mean, just to pick one of the people I talk with in the book was a terrorist. I mean, that is the word he would use to describe himself. He does use to describe his mindset and activities as a child. And when he was a teenager, he was in fact convicted by he's Palestinian, lives in the West Bank, was born in the West Bank, and as a teenager was convicted by the Israeli government of terrorism for an act, mind you, that he physically wasn't present for, that some friends of his had done, that he was involved in the planning of, where no one was actually hurt, but still he and his friends were all convicted and were sent to prison. And what happened is this young man, his name is Bassam, while he was in prison, And while he was, going into prison with a very expressed mindset, he was very clear. He wanted to kill Israelis, and in his mind, in the entirety of his life, he'd only ever known the only Israelis he'd known were Jews. The only Jews he knew were Israelis. They were synonymous in his mind. But when he was in prison, they showed a film about the Holocaust, and he actually went to go watch it because he thought he would enjoy watching Jews be killed. When he saw the film and he saw what had actually happened, this history that he didn't know about, it just broke open his heart, changed his whole mind. And he eventually, after prison, got a master's degree in Holocaust studies and went on to found an organization of former Israeli combatants and soldiers and former Palestinian combatants working for peace and understanding and common ground, which he still does today.
Yeah. I mean, that's it's such a remarkable thing. Really what I admire about what you're trying to do is change the conversation. You're actually just trying to, in fact, I was thinking, she's almost introducing a new progressive, not even or maybe helping define what progressivism is. What does that look like? And is it just going to be one more voice struggling to get in and have a quote unquote debate? And what it seems to me you're interested in doing is asking people to not debate, but to learn to listen, to gain empathy, to gain compassion. So it's about changing. And it's interesting because also the role of social media, how that's changed the face of journalism. And journalism is very much I was a journalist for many, many years, and the whole name of that game is get on and defend your point of view. So you're set in the chair to defend. It's a debate, get ready, go, defend. As opposed to, let's sit down and listen. Let's listen to what each other has to say, because then now we're working towards solutions and understanding, greater understanding, and movement toward a truth that maybe we can all find together. Right? It seems to me that's what struck me about what you're doing and why I say you're top of the list in commentators out there, because you're changing the manner in which we speak to each other. You're asking us to examine it and to look at it. I am. And yeah.
And listen, I think what's really important is to add to what you just said is two distinctions, which is, first of all, what I'm not saying, very importantly, what I'm not saying is that anyone should stop holding their deeply held beliefs, opinions, issues. It's like absolutely not. I still, largely make a living arguing about politics on television. So I'm not letting go of those views anytime soon. And they're important to me, and they're part of what make me, and they're part of what make us a great country, by the way, is that we can have these different viewpoints and debate them. So it's not about that. It's also, right, like nobody's saying let's all be, centrists and compromise on everything and hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Please,
right.
Let's not do that.
Right.
And the other thing is listen, encouraging us to find compassion for people who disagree with us, even for people whose views we find hateful, is not the same thing as agreeing with them. You can find compassion for people and not agree with them. And that's a really, it's a really simple idea, but it somehow seems very radical in this moment where even acknowledging that the other side are human beings who don't mean you harm, it seems somehow treasonous. So I think that's really, it's really important to understand that.
Yeah. And okay, so how do you do that? How do you personally do that? Because it's like, wait a minute, it's hard to, I know you can say, well, let's agree. I mean, it's interesting because my oldest brother and I, he's really right wing and I'm pretty left wing. And yet I absolutely love and I respect him. So there is, you know what it is? We allow each other to come to the table and express our point of views, and we don't we don't work hard to try to change the other guys. We just go, oh, well, why do you see it that way? Oh, like this. Oh, and why do you see it that way? Oh, like that. And usually what we end up doing is finding that we have a lot more common ground by simply allowing that conversation to take place and really attempting to listen to what the other guy has to say. And it's like, oh, point well taken. Actually, no, I have that too. I have that concern too.
Right.
Which seems like sometimes I wonder, do you think, I'm curious about this, and I know this is kind of a heavy accusation, so, but sometimes I wonder if journalism is just fueling that fire of that division, the current model of two sides to the story and, one side over here and one side over there, when most people seem to be somewhat in the middle, given more information and the opportunity to talk in a way that's respectful. Maybe we would all find ourselves a bit more in the middle ground somewhere. Do you think that's true, or is journalism fueling that debate? Do you think in some ways?
Look, there's no question that our current media environment is somewhat averse to nuance.
Yeah.
And that includes cable news, that includes social media, by the way, it includes politics in general.
Yeah.
We are just in a very polarized time. And part of the product of that is that we do not create the space or incentives for the many gray areas in between. And I love your story with your brother in part because, first of all, what it reminds us is, there's a saying that I'm adapting here from Brene Brown, which is it's hard to hate up close.
Right.
And often, especially on social media, a lot of us can be so vitriolic to people who seem anonymous, seem so far away. And when we actually know and remember and think about people who we know and love, it is easier. Listen, I've talked to a lot of people who feel or are estranged from their family members after the most recent election, especially. But when we know people and we love them and we have a positive history with them, it is easier to remember that people are not just who they voted for in 2016, or for that matter, who they voted for in 2008. That we are all more than that. I sure hope I'm more than that.
Yeah.
And to treat each other with a bigger lens and more kindness. And that again, it's easier to do that when you know people, when you can remember that, okay, we don't have this is not the only viewpoint between us, right? And we have this in common and we like that in common. And actually finding common ground. First of all, I know it's hard to believe in this moment, but we still, as human beings, and even human beings in this country, have more in common than not. We do. We just do. And that seems anathema in this political moment. It almost, as I said, seems like you're being a traitor to your side, but it's just true. And there's also a practical piece to this, which is, look, if you just attack someone for their views, right? My whole life, the reason I do the work I do, the reason I wrote this book, the reason I was an organizer, the reason I go on television is because I believe in social change. I believe in changing the policies and structures and institutions of our society that are unjust. And to do that, people also have to change. And I believe people can change, and people have changed. Maybe not as often or as quickly as we would like, but it has happened throughout history, including recently. And if we want people to change, and if we believe people can change, we have to give them the opportunity or the invitation to change. And when we just attack them for their views and portray them as only their most hateful or the views we find the most odious, then actually cognitively what we're doing in the way the brain works is making them dig in their heels and condemning them and our world for them to not ever change. And we want them to change.
Yeah. I keep thinking as I hear you speak, is like, wow, how are you surviving out there? Because you're living, you talk about the bubbles, that we live in our little bubbles. And I think of the Washington journalism, Washington politics, you're kind of up at that level because the journalists are just as sewn into that bubble as are the politicians. And then there's the rest of us, the rest of us people out here that they're supposed to be representing. It seems to me that you're tuned into that a bit here in this clearly through this book, right? More than a bit, quite tuned into it. So how do you, and in some ways you're acting as quite a representative for us in this regard with your book and as a voice in that world. How do you do it?
Well, I mean, I have an endless optimism, or at least I try to have. Sometimes it's challenged. I try to have an endless optimism in my fellow human beings. And look, part of what helps is being a student of history, and especially social movement history, and knowing that, again, we are a country we're a country that was founded in genocide, wiping out the vast majority of the native population, and then a country that was built by slavery, and that imperfectly, incompletely, not as quickly as it should have happened, and yet still our country has changed. We have managed to get better. 100 years ago, 50 years ago, the majority of white people in this country supported segregated schools. Today, that's not true. Doesn't mean we don't still have more to do. Our schools are actually more segregated today than they were 20 years ago. But we've gotten to a point where at least we think that's wrong. And, in my own lifetime, I know people, I have friends, I have family members who were more homophobic 20 years ago than they are today. We as a country, in our culture and our policies, were more homophobic 20 years ago than we are today. So even when it feels impossible, even when we feel like we're in these moments of backlash and retrenchment, it is helpful to remember that we can change, that people can open their minds and their hearts and be less hateful. It has happened before. It can happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're giving me hope anyway, because I'll tell you what I've been thinking about lately, but we need to take a short break right now, unfortunately.
Okay.
But when we come back, just in case you tuned in, we're speaking with author and commentator Sally Kohn about her new book, The Opposite of Hate. We're talking about how to move forward and try to find a little kindness in today's divisive public that we live in. So we'll be right back after these short messages. And we are back speaking with author and political commentator Sally Kohn about her new book, The Opposite of Hate. And Sally, are you there?
I'm still here.
Yay, hallelujah. Okay. So now where can we get your book?
Oh, that's a great question. My favorite place for you to get it is to go into your local independent bookstore and either pick it up there or ask them to order it, or obviously at your library. But you can also get it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all those other fancy places.
You know what? I think you have a TV show here, and I have you had any offers yet?
Oh, my gosh. I'm going to hire you as my publicist.
Well...
Listen, I'm just trying to get through this part of, getting the book out there, having the conversations with people who are reading it. It's been really, really rewarding, and the response has been it seems to be sparking a lot of the conversations and reflection and that I had hoped.
Yay. Well, I think it needs to be followed up with a regular series so you can have your own show. I don't care what network it's on, just as long as you get it and let us know about it so we can tune in and watch. And, maybe we'll see some hug therapy between Republicans and Democrats instead of boxing gloves. You never know. It might, no.
Hug therapy might be a step too far, but I'll invite you on for that.
Okay. Sounds good. This is really vital what you're saying. And this is very important. And the reason is, you talk, am I allowed to say, that you talk to some survivors of Rwanda in your book? Okay, I don't know how much I can reveal or not reveal.
No.
But
you're right. That's a story that I want people, they get to read it on their own and discover it on their own. But, yes, I went to Rwanda. I talked with people who had been survivors of and perpetrators during the genocide. spent time in the Middle East, people on both sides of that conflict, ex-neo-Nazis, called my own internet trolls on the phone and talked with them. So tried to really get at lots of different sides and perspectives on this problem of hate and otherizing and demeaning and dehumanizing people.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's so critical, because that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Why is this so important in relation to genocide, and how is it related?
Well, one of the things that for me, that was the hardest part of the book to research, the hardest part to write. I think it's still the hardest part to read. It's what I'm hearing from people. And it's just, for me, you can do as much as you can to prepare and read about what happened in a place like Rwanda, but to actually go and experience it and talk to people and really understand as much as one can without living through it, the horrors, the capacity we have as human beings to do such atrocious and horrific things. And, in Rwanda in particular, where, it wasn't people were killing their friends and their godchildren and their brother and sister-in-laws. And, one of the things that really took my breath away when I was, that I cite in the book, is a philosopher who said to me, that people don't commit, we don't have mass atrocities because of a handful of psychopaths in each place. There aren't enough psychopaths in the population in Rwanda or Germany or Serbia. There aren't. The reason we have mass atrocities is because masses of people participate in them. And really wrestling with that, really understanding that, we tend to think of this as some other, thing. Even when we use words like evil, it's like it's otherworldly, or these are things we, as human beings, all of us, are capable of. And really wrestling with that, really grappling with that, I think is fundamentally important to the process of becoming better people and becoming a better society.
Yeah, and the notion of contending with our own hate. That's what struck me, was that you were really making that connection between hate and genocide. And if you think they're far apart, they're actually quite close cousins. And sort of something like, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that the root of genocide is in our hate. It begins in that. That's the beginning, the first chapter.
It's in our capacity to otherize people and groups of people, especially because of their ideas or their identities, to such an extent at the extreme where we dehumanize them, where we actually see them as less human than ourselves, or even not human. And in Rwanda, part of what facilitated that was Hutu extremist organizations and leaders referring to the Tutsi people as cockroaches. We see the same thing in other genocides, and frankly, we see the same thing here in the United States when we generalize and stereotype certain people, certain groups of people, not as humans who have done X, Y, or Z, but as the totality of those bad acts, and where we represent a whole group of people based on the bad acts of a few. So, example, it's when Donald Trump talks about Mexicans as drug dealers and rapists. That's heading in that direction of dehumanization. And it's when people talk about, in general, immigrants as hordes or swarms. Those are, people don't swarm, right? That's an animal or insect metaphor. That sort of pattern, that behavior is worrisome, especially when you look at what happens in the more extreme examples when groups of people are systematically dehumanized.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is very real to me. And we do it to each other. And can you expound on the ways that we do it, or ways that you even discovered in yourself, potentially ways that you might have been doing it to other people? You talk a little bit about Sticky Vicky.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I was a bully, and it's and in the book I share a story of one kid in particular whose life in elementary school I made miserable, and then through the course of the book I go back and try to find her and make amends, and it's and a lot of people react to that, at least initially when I was sort of working on drafts of the book, and they would say, or when I was preparing the TED talk I gave about the book, they'd say, wait a second, bullying isn't hate. And it's important that we understand hate in a spectrum. So, of course, I wasn't like actively, overtly bigoted against, in some conscious and explicit way, against this girl and the groups that she represented. But what's also true is I was a relatively rich kid picking on a poor kid. She had some, learning challenges, and she ended up eventually being gay. And those are the same groups of people we discriminate against as adults in our public policy and in our culture and in our society. And so they aren't the same thing, but they have similar roots. It's that history in the past and the habit in the present of demeaning and dehumanizing certain people, and especially certain groups of people, because of their identity and their ideas. And so understanding the sort of pervasive and pernicious ways in which those patterns of hate operate is essential to rooting it out in all of its forms and seeing how all of us play a part, even when we don't mean to.
Yeah, and you actually looked up Vicky, didn't you? You went to try to find her, and what was the result of that?
Well, I don't want to spoil it too much for people, but I will say that no, you're fine. I will say that the short version is she didn't forgive me. And what's interesting is, it's not. She doesn't. Oh, sorry. You got my dog barking in the background. I'm so sorry. All right with that?
Yeah, that's fine. Welcome, dog.
All right. I know. She's a very anxious dog. And this story in particular just really upsets her. Just calm down.
Aww.
You're not. All right. Yeah, I know. Poor dog. Anyway, sorry about that. You can edit that as you see fit. So, what's important, I think, is that forgiveness isn't a condition of an apology. In other words,
wait, I'm sorry. Forgiveness, that you were cut up just for a second there. Forgiveness is not.
Sorry.
No problem. Forgiveness
isn't a condition of an apology. In other words, it was on me to apologize. I needed to apologize for a whole set of personal and moral reasons. It was important to me to apologize. It bothered me my entire adult life. It was increasingly something that disturbed me, especially as I worked to be someone trying to challenge hate in myself and in society. But it is also, when you make a mistake, when you do something hurtful, when you do something you feel is wrong and you apologize for it, it's up to the other person whether they're going to forgive you or not. And in this case, she didn't. And that's her choice.
And that struck me too. And then how do you deal with that? What is your response to that lack of forgiveness?
Well, it's, and I talk about it in the book. Of course, I wanted to be forgiven. Everyone wants, when you've done something wrong and you apologize earnestly and, as meaningfully and as wholly as you can, of course you want to be forgiven. But part of it is to, for me, it kind of, look, in a way, the book as a whole isn't a destination. It's not a, look here, I'm done, I figured out everything's about hate and myself and I'm finished and a completely perfect person and here's the roadmap for you. It is a work in progress. I am a work in progress. And in a way, the lack of finality with Vicky spoke to the broader. It's an ongoing process. It's ongoing work. It doesn't end. But there's not some point where you say we as a society are done. We've rooted out all injustice and hate, and there's not some point where you say I as a person am done. And that reinforced it for me.
Yeah, it's also something, as you were talking about Sticky Vicky, I thought I was reflecting on a lot of the people that there's, a sector of the white population that can feel resentful of, oh, well, the blacks still hate us or the Native Americans still hate us. Well, we didn't do it. I didn't do it to you. I mean, there's a guy, Tom McDonald, I actually really like, he's a rapper and I really like some of his music, but he's got one out. I think it's called, White. Oh, now I'm forgetting. But it's all about that notion of, hey, I'm a good white guy. I don't agree with what they did to you black people. So please don't blame me. Stop blaming me. And yet I think it seems, isn't that once you've been betrayed? I mean, if you think of any one of us who's been betrayed ever in your life by somebody and your trust has been trampled on, absolutely trampled on, that's like asking you to get back together, in a sense, not really get back together with your boyfriend who really screwed you over or your girlfriend, whoever it is that screwed you over. But it's kind of like saying, hey, can we be friends again? And while there might be a desire to say, well, I can kind of forgive you from afar, but it's not like I want to run off and go down the street with you even as a friend anymore, because this trust has been, betrayed. So, yeah. So it's sort of like, what's up?
It's also recognizing that, just like going back to the notion of apologizing, just like intent and impact are different things, right?
Intent versus impact? Intent versus
correct.
Impact? Uh-huh.
Intent versus impact. So I didn't intend to hurt your feelings, but I hurt your feelings.
Right.
I just hurt your feelings. I mean, look, I've been through a lot of couples counseling, so I've learned this. It doesn't matter if I intended to hurt my partner's feelings. If I hurt her feelings are hurt, and I should apologize.
Yeah.
Now, in that case, but do something to make amends. So, there is a reality. If we recognize a reality, right? And it's interesting. I think in a lot of ways, for a whole host of reasons, we often have an easier time having this conversation around gender and sexism and misogyny than we do around racism. So, for instance, it is not most of us living today's fault that there are, so few women in executive suites and in elected office, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and that there is sexual harassment and sexual assault. And at the same time, are you just going to abdicate any responsibility? You're not going to do anything. So because I didn't cause the problem, I'm not going to help solve it. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to make an effort if I'm a, male CEO to, recruit and hire and promote and retain talented women executives. And that because I didn't cause the problem, right? Like, no one would say that. They're going to say, hey, it's part of being a good person in this world is helping to right the wrongs of the past, even those I wouldn't have wished for and like to think that I wouldn't have supported in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And right back at men, women also are doing our best to find ways that, men can say, well, I'm oppressed too by this system and, it hurts me too. So we can say, well, right. It does have an impact on you. So let's lessen that also. I think impact, that is a critical distinction, the intent versus impact, and to not mistake those two. But so often I'm with you that they get interconnected or somehow mistaken one for the other. So that's a critical difference, I think, that you're making there. And it is important to acknowledge the impact, And not just the impact, but let's then do something about it, because an apology means nothing without actions that then change. So if black people are still feeling like they're getting incarcerated in mass proportion, their rights are being taken away, they are given no political voice, they're going to create an organization called Black Lives Matter, and they really would like to be respected in that process, acknowledged. It's sort of hard to, and they could say, well, it's an equal playing field. You know, I want to respect you, but I think in some ways it's hard to be respected when you haven't even felt acknowledged yet. And impact is what gives us that acknowledgement, you know, recognizing the impact, right?
You know, that's exactly right. And, you know, part of my goal with this book is, look, we have mounds of lived experience and testimony to the rampant reality of institutional racism and sexism and other forms of discrimination. And in addition to a tremendous body of research documenting those disparate impacts and discriminatory outcomes. So my hope would be that we as a society, we as a country, can get to the point where we stop arguing about whether it is still, stop arguing about whether it is a fact that the police disproportionately target, intentionally or not, disproportionately target communities of color. Again, the evidence is overwhelming. It would be, to me, it would be a giant step forward if we could stop arguing about that fact and instead start arguing about the solutions, about what we're going to do about it.
And that's a primo example right there of the difference between intent and impact. I mean, so yeah, that is a critical distinction, and it seems to be that I that drives me nuts. I'm with you all the way. I don't know why. What do you think is at that? Why are people so afraid to acknowledge that as a fact? Do you think it's a human desire to say, no, I'm not a bad guy. Stop making me a bad guy.
No, I think it's, to be honest, I think it's a series of complicated factors. One is that we as a society have not done a great job of helping ourselves understand the difference between implicit and explicit bias. So I think people, when they're sort of confronted with statistics, for instance, about police being more likely to arrest people of color, pull over and arrest people of color, to be violent with people of color, that rates of conviction and sentencing, even for the same crimes, or higher. When they see the data, they go to, I think the cognitive sort of link is, well, wait a second, but the cops, you're saying that all the cops are overt bigots, overt racists, and they're not, and I know good cops and not all cops, and blah, 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 blah. And because what is true, it's harder to wrap your head around cognitively, especially when you've been sort of raised in that idea of racism, is know, in fact, that it's independent of the intentions of individual or particular cops, that this is about systems, this is about patterns, this is about widespread culture, this is about, it's the phenomenon where one thing that white college kids and black cops have in common is you have them do a simulated video game where they're supposed to pull a trigger on a target if the target is armed. And the white college kids and the black cops were both more likely to pull the trigger on the unarmed black suspects and let the white armed suspects go. So that's not about overt bigotry. In that case, it's not even about the police per se. It's about patterns, history, habits, unconscious, workings of our mind, the ways that the bias and hate and stereotypes and discrimination of society have, taken root in our minds, in our habits. And it becomes especially pertinent, of course, if you're a police officer or police force and have, deadly state power. But it's there's a sense in which it is more complicated, and we haven't done a good job wrestling with those complications. And then the other dimension is it then becomes partisan. And that's disappointing because there's a way in which there are certain issues, and we can name what they are, right? Where we, you just, once I know which side you're on, I'll take the other side. Doesn't, and that's disturbing, right? Mm-hmm. Once upon a time, remember, Republicans supported comprehensive immigration reform and believed in climate change. So I'm sure we can think of issues on the other side too. So there are issues that become politicized when that prevents us from actually solving them because everybody just picks a camp.
Yep. Yeah, we really seem frozen in this in that dynamic, and that's why I'm so glad you've written this book. We are running close to the end of our show. We've got about 5 minutes left. Then I'm speaking with Sally Kohn, author and political commentator Sally Kohn, about her new book, The Opposite of Hate, encouraging us to get beyond our hate and begin to dialogue differently with each other. I've been sort of, my burning question in this for me to you has been, where do you draw the line being, Democrats are often accused of being too soft. Well, they just don't fight hard enough, and they get run over all the time because they always think that people have the best intentions, and, everybody's going to be polite at the table, and then they're not, and then they get run over. So you hear that complaint a lot. So how do you stand up for yourself and be stern and stand for something? I mean, I think back on Martin Luther King, and I'm thinking, are we reaching a point where civil disobedience is going to become a way in which an avenue we need to take? Because how do we stand up for ourselves? Isn't there a moment and where we do draw a line in the sand and we say, okay, look, I will try to understand you as much as I can, but I do draw this line. Or maybe what is that line? What is that line we're drawing in the sand? And how do you do it is it possible to do it in a civil way without having to lead toward, getting run over by the bully, as it were?
Yeah, look, I don't, again, my belief is, I'm a student of nonviolent social movements. There is research over the last 200 years that in movements for revolutionary change, that is for change, sort of transformation of entire societies and political dynamics, that nonviolent movements have been more effective around the world throughout 200 years of history than violent movements. They've also more effective in terms of achieving their goals, and also actually are quicker too. So I am, and certainly in our country, we've had a history of both, but I remain both morally and practically committed to nonviolence and to the idea of it, because the reason I am a progressive is I say I believe in the equality and humanity of all people. And I tend to, though, only actually say it and do it when it comes to my quote-unquote people, my side, but I mean it for everyone, in theory. The question is, do I really mean it even for those people who would deny my equality and humanity? That's a profound moral question. Again, I also believe in it as a practical dimension, too. And that we're not going to change anyone by attacking them and making them feel hateful, stupid, mean, right? That the question to me in my organizing and politics is, am I giving a way for people to change and transform? But that being said, at the end of the day, you still stand up for what you believe is right, and you stand against what you think is wrong. I don't see those things in conflict. I believe we can stand up for what we believe in without stomping on other people.
Yeah, that belief in that alone. And that, I believe, was pretty much the intent of your book. And hopefully, let's make sure it's the impact. Let's hope that so. Your book has that same impact. Do you want you said it in a? I want you to use your words, but I think I've heard you say, when people say, "Why did you write this book?" You talk about wanting to be an inspiration. Can you tell us why you wrote this book in a sentence? Your hope.
Yeah, my hope is, look, since we all have this, they started it, someone else started it, a philosophy of hate. That instead we start to understand our shared problem with hate and the piece, all of it, the piece that all of us play in the dynamic of hate. And if we can do that, then we each try to not be the excuse for someone else to be hateful, but instead be the inspiration for others to be their best self. And also work to eradicate hate in policies and institutions, our politics, our media, our culture. But it begins with seeing ourselves as part of the problem and part of the solution.
Yeah, and I love you also talk about the importance of forgiveness. And what that brings to mind for me is also the importance of allowing ourselves to make mistakes and realize this is a process. We are in process, learning how to do this. We don't have an instruction booklet, although yours is a fantastic beginning book to begin that process. So, The Opposite of Hate is the name of the book. We're speaking to author Sally Kohn. I want to thank you so much for being here. Go to your local bookstore, buy one. If you're at home and you can't get out, all right, I guess Amazon.com, right? Or wherever else you can, Barnes & Noble.
Somewhere like that.
Yeah, somewhere like that. But buy the book, The Opposite of Hate, Sally Kohn, A Field Guide to Repairing Our Humanity. Sally, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. And will you come back and see us sometime?
Anytime. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And keep up the good work. We're all behind you. And, when you're on those
you too.
on those political talk shows, we're standing right behind you. So let's hope that
Thanks so much.
Yeah, we can follow your inspiration. Thank you. And
I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thanks so much for joining us right here on Dialogue, KSFR 101.1 FM. We'll see you next week.
Talk to me. Talk to me.